February 6th, 2022. A friend of mine messaged me on Twitter with a video link. This is that video. And while it is a bit more insane than most, it's not too out of the ordinary for internet standards. However, what caught my attention, and what my friend pointed out, was its small view count, and the fact that it's unlisted. At the end of their initial messages, they provide me with a link to the Neocities website in which the video originally came from. Little did I know, this was the beginning of my descent down the rabbit hole. SIP.neocities.org is nothing short of the word insane. At first glance, the rather basic minimal presentation may be deceiving. The first pieces of information are innocent enough. A link to a god-tier AMV collection and a video labeled Spin Spin. The video may draw questions in correlation with significance. What purpose does it serve exactly is unknown, but it is there, front and center, and it's harmless. However, right below the video reads, "Ancient philosophers died for you. Do not let their knowledge go to waste," followed by a foreboding link saying, "This is what you've been looking for. Click with care." The site will redirect you to a digital PDF version of Vladimir Valerian's Matrix 4, the Equividium, Paradigms and Dimensions of Human Evolution and Consciousness. A 1,098-page book, or tome, if you will, covering what it means to be a spiritual being living through a human experience. The book provides a large collection of perspectives regarding the spiritual, psychological, alchemical, and transdimensional realities the human condition finds itself nested in. As you have probably already pieced together, this is the fourth entry of a total of 5, with this one having a specific infatuation on paradigms. For the unaware, paradigms are distinct concepts or standards, all of which have a particular element based on a single stem or theme. Contextually, in this work, it relates to paradigms of the human spiritual existence and the human consciousness. And this is where I'm going to stop acting like I know everything. Honestly, these are too high of concepts for me to grasp. And speaking from the heart, it's insane ramblings. And I do not mean this lightly or jokingly, but the author, Vladimir Valerian, seems to be schizophrenic. There is very surprisingly little information on this man on the internet. Even a short, simple biography was impossible to find. However, my conclusion of Valerian comes down to a passage written early on in Matrix 4 describing his trials and tribulations with getting the book published. It reads, "Never has one piece of work been so fraught with cosmic delays as Matrix 4. From the cosmic intrusions into life of MT, the black helicopters flying from the bay right over the houses with guys leaning out with black boxes, the California fire, operations and health problems for AAA, files mysteriously disappearing from computers, concerns about planetary conjunctions and timing, re-entering corrections, and a host of other events, all seemingly indicating that Matrix 4 is deemed by some to function as some sort of cultural hinge-pinch relative to the transformation of society. It has taken the better part of a year to assemble this book. I think you will agree that it's been well worth the wait." But going back to sip.neocities.org, it's this kind of philosophy that is found throughout the webpage, along with other religious, spiritual, and alternative science rhetoric. There's also an emphasis on anime, more specifically Serial Experiments Lain and Neon Genesis Evangelion, albeit more so visual than substantial. Although it is worth pointing out that both anime series at least touch upon certain themes or ideas these sites often discuss. However, that being said, Serial Experiments Lain frequently pops up in many of these different sites we will talk about later, oftentimes using terminology or referencing ideas from said show to support their very own. So just know that these discussions aren't specific to this one site. As we travel down the rabbit hole, we will find many shared opinions in the same manner. All of this seemingly stems from the idea of epistemology, which is a branch of philosophy concerned with the nature of knowledge and the different methods of gaining or preserving knowledge, despite the knowledge's popularity. If a tree falls in the woods and no one's around to see it, does it make a sound? Distilled down, this quote is talking about perception. Of course the tree emits a sound, but with no witnesses, does it really matter? For generations to come, people will just see a fallen tree. The knowledge of its sound is lost unless properly documented, and that's exactly what these sites aim to do. Through the internet, these pieces of philosophy and alternative science, oftentimes not discussed via mainstream media, will not cease to exist unless it is preserved by these sites. I think this idea also ties into their infatuation with the late 90s internet, and why many of these people flee to NeoCities or AngelFire, because during the dot-com boom, these were the first big internet website hosts. Meaning, this was the first time this type of knowledge was commonly discussed and shared around before being suppressed by the more commercialized and corporatized internet, something we'll touch upon throughout the video. But if you look at this from a chronological perspective, you can almost understand their sentiment in regards to the early internet years. As before the internet, learning about any different perspectives were much harder. But since the birth of the internet, many were able to easily share their own outlooks, interpretations, medical remedies, and so on and so forth. The problem, as we'll see later, is that these people seem to grasp onto any and all alternative forms of science, philosophy, religion, etc., all while becoming increasingly distrusting of anything mainstream. But, as I said many times before, more on that later. Exploring the page further would reveal that a portion of the site is taken up with text reciting Nick Land's Meltdown, which is another high-concept piece exploring accelerationism that can be somewhat hard to follow along. A Reddit user even went as far as by saying, "It's reprehensible schizobabble in the best way possible. It's way more fun to read than most other critical theory, in my opinion." This topic of accelerationism is oftentimes met with a nihilistic viewpoint amongst these communities, citing that communication via Wi-Fi, dial-up, 4G, 5G, IRC channels, etc., have sped up faster than any other time in human history, and in return is dooming humanity. A point that is somewhat hypocritical, as these people seem to be a fan of the more primitive and dated ways of communication presented in the late 90s. Some form of chat room will usually be promoted across all these sites we are set to discuss. On one hand, I understand where they're coming from. Nowadays, there really are so many ways to connect and talk amongst anyone from around the world. And maybe the more rudimentary methods used prior were just better for limiting our easy access to such revenues. But exactly at what point is the line drawn? And why act like there are no benefits to the modern internet landscape? Well, you see, oftentimes these sites will fall into two extremes. Either they're incredibly nihilistic on any given subject matter, or they're delusionally optimistic and enlightened. Something I'm sure you'll pick up on throughout, which does, in turn, make a lot of these sites somewhat hypocritical or at least contradictory. Either they're all for the idea of accelerationism, or they're borderline fear-mongering, preaching the horrors that entail such advancements in society. They seem to be rather selective on what are good examples of accelerationism and what are bad versions of accelerationism. But I guess the main idea in this scenario is that it's better to stay in the past than aid in the ongoing collapse. Now, it can all be a bit much. Reading through this entire page will almost certainly fry your brain. Most of these writings are nonsensical ramblings, whether it's discussions surrounding divine sexual energy, correct breathing techniques, or relating our sense of purpose to mathematical sequences. It's a whole lot to take in. Even trying to decipher the many charts and diagrams sprinkled in throughout can prove challenging. This diagram, for example, explains how angels can enter your body. And when you save the image to your computer, it's called schizo.png. However, the one bright spot that shines through are the interpersonal messages Olivia, the creator of the site, will scatter throughout. Very much akin to diary entries or even tweets, but more unhinged and completely removed from context. I'll give you guys a little taste by sharing some of my favorites. My incel powers are fading. I no longer examine women like an entomologist or generate abstruse, evo-psych explanations for their puzzling behavior. All it took for me to become a real person was regular sex. I'm not long for this platform. I would never resort to call myself a digital angel, as much as I want to, as I know if the medium of pixels was translating to the physical, I would spread a treatable venereal disease to most of my followers. Give in to my overwhelming lust. Kiss, kiss. New virus called feelings. Don't catch that shit. True shit posting involves entering a trance state, a lucidity ritual that serves to channel muse of the noosphere, drawn out artifacts emblematic of the collective consciousness, great truths manifest, self-organizing bouts of anonymous, egoless shit posting. Warning, attention, warning. If you know any girls with BPD, invite them here. Embrace the borderline culture. The fuck when look at only one diaper fetish porno and all of a sudden I'm bombarded with diaper ads. Do you think the Bazinga baby eats Big Bang Bazinga Bing Bong burgers? And many, many more examples. And while this was fun, the journey is far from over. At the very top of the site, that I have neglected thus far, is a myriad of different links listed as cool sites. The first one is called 3D Testosterone. On entry, the site celebrates its 2nd year anniversary. Going further down, we are greeted with a looping image, with a quick blurb talking about how virus software is much like a virus in and of itself, with how much it slows down your computer with all of its scans. Going further will lead to a dead end, with a screen saying, Sector Authority not available. All things considered, a minor site probably not worth mentioning, however I do believe there's something up with the site that I'll get to later on. But moving down the list. The next link will direct you to an internet archive from May 9th, 2008 of Kepper.net. This site includes links to many different topics. There is seemingly no linking connection between subject matters at large, because on a micro scale, topics such as astrology and astronomy coexisting in the same list make a lot of sense. But it becomes confusing on a macro scale once you realize the list also consists of topics like Taoism and memes. However, as you can see, each entry has its own link. Unfortunately, many were not properly archived, but those that were reveal the true intent of the site. You see, every topic, every link will take you to what is essentially an opinion piece written by one man, cited by questionable sources, if at all. Click on religion and be treated passages like to distinguish between religion and cult is so absurd, because every religion started as a guru cult, and every guru cult is a new religion that has aroused the ire of the mainstream. And these writings are extensive. Each page will have a plethora of additional links that break off into their own little sections. It is also here that we will see some familiar ideologies and philosophies. Oh, in case anyone was wondering, the meme section is talking about the meme, as in the scientific theory. Never heard of it? Well, it's not really supported by science, it's more so a social science theory. Basically, a meme is a cultural equivalent of a gene. How genes are passed down from one generation to the next, ideas are passed down from one generation to the next, and that's a meme. However, if one is not privy to this information, certain passages end up being hilarious taken out of context, such as religion, or belief in an external god, constitutes as a very successful meme. It is also at this point where I'm going to be diving into religion a bit more. Not my own beliefs, however the expressed beliefs that seemingly link every one of these sites together. You see, general discussion surrounding religion as a whole is more or less at some moment a key talking point amongst this community. Usually this amounts to wildly different interpretations from various different religious texts, or in other cases, applying religious philosophies to certain aspects of life. These religious philosophies are also subjected to their own interpretations and practices will vary. However, even if these subjects are not brought up, there will still be some form of subtext. A majority of these sites actually view the internet as a holy place, almost as if it's a spiritual or religious experience. Of course, it should go without saying that when I say the internet in this scenario, I'm more so referring to the old internet. Think early 90s dial-up and whatnot. We can speculate that this ties back into what we discussed earlier, for in the eyes of these people, the 90s internet was untainted by corporations. Information was for everyone, and information was true and unsuppressed by paid studies. In many ways, this newfound freedom of information has enlightened them in some sense. There is many ways to define religion, and there's no one true way to describe it. However, one of the many definitions describes it as a pursuit or interest to which someone ascribes supreme importance, which is precisely what I believe has taken place. In some regards, there's even a bit of spiritual accelerationism at play here too. An adaptation of religions applied to contemporary living is something that hasn't been done in hundreds of years, yet it's seemingly happening on the internet amongst these tight-knit communities. But moving on from all that, original Buddhism is the next link down. Something Olivia has already discussed on her own website, and it's no longer a safe link. Who knows what this originally linked to, but it would be a safe bet to say it would have been similar to the information already provided by Olivia. So, moving on down, collection of important thoughts, highlights posted down below in blog. This will take you to a Google Doc titled Archive, with the first page reading, Collected Shitpost Noosphere Deviations from the Cyber Gore Patron Saint of the Wired, Maya, Black-Hearted Cyber Angel Baby. And yeah, pretty self-explanatory if you ask me. While it is just a long list of shitposts, there is slightly more than meets the eye. For starters, there are 4 links at the top of the page. Links 1, 3, and 4 no longer work, leaving the only link called Maya's Sites left still functioning. A site simply called Zygo is yet another hub for a collection of knowledge, or should I say very specific knowledge that we have discussed so far. It even has a collection of Nick Land's work, who we are already familiar with. However, down the K space under Detritus, which means waste or debris of any kind, we can see our very own Maya Cyber Angel. This is what her page looks like, and unfortunately, none of the links work. Which is a shame, because I would have loved to read her essay called Monkey Pianist, or her commentary on the Joker film. However, interesting point of note, the dimwit/topwit horseshoe theorem, or the malaise of the internal midwit, is actually properly archived on both the Google Docs and sip.neocities. It's not an all too interesting theory, so let's just get into shitposts instead, because I know that's what you guys really want to hear. Now, I have to warn you, these are even more nonsensical than the previous batch. Runaway egregorism, the Wired made real, new gods. What does it take to make you realize digital deities are real? Do you really not know masturbating to your tohos is a worship ritual manifesting their existence libidinally? Libidinally? Am I stupid? What does that word mean? Libidinally. Huh. Psychic and emotional energy associated in instinctual biological drives. Probably just an idiot. Anyways, the suspension of disbelief barrier must come down. Still dumbfounded how much effortless power the egolessness forged by anonymous shitposting, born into, not adopted, holds over the weakling identity-obsessed socialites whenever their miserable dopamine farms are raided and colonized. Steppe nomads and Neolithics is an apt metaphor. Y'all never just raise up an entire large communities just to annihilate as mass virtual sacrifice? Anime cons are the ultimate spaces of the real made Wired. People reminisce on mid-2000s golden age, but it's still there. You can still get fed drugs, day drunk with the bros, hotel room orgy with hot but insane cosplayers, live more life in 3 days at 16 than most do in 30 years. A viral ecosphere will form over the www, resulting in a rapid and intense programmatic diversity, whose optimization will be mined for all future code. All scientific paradigms exist as abstractions of the world, simplistically modeled to be understandable. Science doesn't test reality, but constructed simulation, moving on to new ones when the contradictions of the false paradigm become unsustainable. It's only a puzzle game. Nature is a sociopath. I'm only her scribe. I'm not gonna fucking lie, y'all. I might be illiterate. Those were really fucking hard to read for some reason. And once again, many, many more. Near the end, they provide 92 reasons why they are cyberpunk and you are not. Feel free to pause the video and read through it if you want. Then it is followed up with a 23-step process for developing an online presence of mind. The thread does make it a point to highlight the 4 most important ones, however. Those being 1. Ignore the social. 2. Treat posts discreetly. 3. Treat yourself sovereign. 4. Value only lols and self-improvement. Some other highlights include, obviously, there are girls on the internet these days, but we don't think about them. I speak, spiritually, to a male audience, and so should you. And if anyone's actions online reflect a goal of anything other than 1. Lols, 2. Self-improvement, they're toxic. These ideals are just another example of accelerationism. The mindset shown here demonstrates that on some level these people know technological advancements will lead to the downfall of humanity. However, if you stay restrained to your own little bubble, the speed of which will significantly slow down. We all know the bridge is going to collapse. Why speed it up? It's also important to note that this ideology has been adopted and applied in a more social standing, more infamously by white supremacists. And while I would not jump to such conclusions, there is an underlying possibility here. But finally moving on, we go down one more to Forgotten Languages, which links to a website that, surprise, surprise, is all about forgotten or dead languages. However, the whole site is also written in a wide array of these languages. Languages that just don't work in Google Translate. It would be easy to move right along past this site, marking it as a interesting yet brief footnote. However, there is a tab called Videos, which will redirect you to a YouTube channel called Angel Regina. Sorry if I butchered that. The video in question looks like this. a series of stock footage overlaid with what I would describe as a psychedelic motion video. The channel's last video was in August of 2018, with the first video being posted in July of 2012, spanning just over 6 years with 249 videos in total. It's hard to draw any inherent meaning behind any of it, but I wanted to know more. What is this and the site truly all about? So I dug deep. And by dug deep, I mean I copy and pasted the channel name into Google, and this is one of the first links that popped up. It's an interview conducted by Sasa Milik with a blog entry labeled as My Emails with Andril. First line stating, "This is a series of excerpts from an email exchange I had with Andril, site admin and one of several contributors to Forgotten Languages." So we can now confirm that this man is in fact behind the site in question. It wasn't too hard to come to that conclusion on our own, but at least now it's concrete. The interview is unfortunately not what I wanted it to be, yet somewhat expected. You see, I wanted this interview to serve as a way to get a personal look at the man behind the website. You know, see what he's like and get a glimpse at the more personal side of someone behind these many sites. But instead, this interview seemed to be more keen discussing linguistics and its relation to philosophy, computer programming, and cognitive psychology. Every one of Andril's responses is very professional, clearly PR trained, and devoid of any sense of that personality I was hoping to get. But what that leaves us with is a very boring interview. I'll link it in the description down below if you really want to read through it, but for the sake of the pacing, we have to move on. Next link, Gnosis Basics. Gnostic or Gnosticisms are essentially religious myths or misinterpretations. At least that is the definition provided at the very start of this site. Actual Gnosticism is defined a whole lot differently. Surprise, surprise. However, I believe this explanation is more so for newcomers to easily equate the practice in terms they would understand, because the actual site does dive into real Gnosticism in depth. However, even under the guise of religious myths, the site doesn't flat out make absurd claims like Noah's Ark is a biblical myth. Instead, it's more so making claims that collectively people have misinterpreted nuanced ideologies within the Bible. These claims are backed up by using other religions and science for their sources, oftentimes diving into the more spiritual philosophies backed by science, just to specify. One such example is the story of Adam and Eve. An orthodox perspective would regard the two as historical figures and viewed as the literal ancestors of our species, deducing their transgressions as specific moral consequences, the fall of the human race due to original sin. However, the Gnostic perspective is that Adam and Eve were in fact not historical figures, but rather representatives of two intrapsychic principles that exist within every human being, with Adam being the embodiment of psyche or soul, while Eve is the embodiment of pneuma or spirit. They give specific quotes from the Bible, and per their own analysis can make such claims about many events or stories from the Bible. They also provide many links to different books written on the matter along with web lectures. Now, I'm not a religious man by any means, but I do believe religious texts are up for interpretation. And by all means, a lot of these entries that I have read didn't seem all too outlandish. So perhaps this site is worth digging through to someone with a bigger religious background than I. But moving on, the next link down, Cybernetic Culture Research Unit, which there's some history here. You see, the Cybernetic Culture Research Unit relates to a group of researchers from the mid to late 90s whose studies fixated on hyperstition, which is the experimental technoscience of self-fulfilling prophecies. Originally formed at Warwick University, England, before gradually separating from academia before dissolving in 2003. Despite this, it has clearly accumulated a cult following online over the years. Interestingly enough, the university has gone through great lengths to disassociate with the research unit, even going as far to state that it never existed. The two former leaders are also a point of interest, as they consisted of one Sadie Plants and one Nick Land, who we have already discussed. But it is these esoteric cybernetic ideas and beliefs which are initially incomprehensible, so they can covertly fly under the radar and circulate through wider internet cultural feedback loops that meld society, with a chance of further infiltrating real life. In a sense, this relates back to the social science theorem of memes, with the goal of information being passed down throughout the generations. But back to the site itself. You know you're in for a wild ride when this is the first thing you see. A cluster of numbers and arrows seemingly lacking any pattern or purpose. However, click on almost any link and be whisked away to that numbers zone. There, you will find various different pieces of information relating to said number, distinctly categorized into 4 sections: numeral, planet, system notes, and what I just referred to as lemurs. Under the numeral section, you will find miscellaneous information on said number. Information such as 7 digitally accumulates to 28, or numeric keypad direction northwest. There's even a full passage talking about the number's biblical importance. The planet category is pretty simple. Each number represents a planet, and that's what the section talks about. System notes is all about numerograms, which is what this whole chart is about, and its relation to said number. Now, yeah, I'm going to stop the video right here. Listen, my original explanation for what numerograms were was complete shit. And I'm a little sick right now, and I don't exactly have the energy to re-record all of that. So instead, I'm going to play a snippet from a video by this creator explaining exactly what numerograms are.
So within the numerogram, we have 5 syzygies, so spheres that represent numbers that are facing each other. And each of these syzygies adds up to 9. So that's 1 and 8, 2 and 7, 3 and 6, 4 and 5. You get the point. So from each Sephora stems a number, and this number is the corresponding triangular number. So let's start at the top with the number 3. So what's the third triangular number? 1, 3, 6. 6 is the third triangular number. Thus 6 connects to 6. So following this, what's the 6th triangular number? 21. And 21 connects to 3. And I'm sure you're wondering how 21 and 3 are numerically equivalent. But within this kind of numerology, what we do is look at the digits of a number as integers. So 21 is composed of 2 and 1. And we need to collapse 2 and 1 into a singular digit, being 2 plus 1, 3. Thus 6 connects to 3 via 21.
Then finally, lemurs is just some computer science program code shit. I don't know. Honestly, any research on this just kind of leads me back to this site, so your guess is as good as mine. Circling back to the main page, we can find tabs at the very top as well. Now, each one isn't worth highlighting too much. Like the abstract culture tab simply leads you to this page in which there's a body of work for you to read through at your leisure. And hey, look, it's Nick Land's Meltdown again. Seems to be a reoccurring piece of work within these scenes, huh? Sigi takes you to this page, which I can't decipher. Have fun in the comments, I guess. There's also the links page that has a bunch of different links to a bunch of different things. I'm talking aliens, Cthulhu, Hyperdub, which is a sonar tracking site, but there are many, many links, each a rabbit hole in their own right. So I'll move right along to the only other notable thing on the site, the Identity tab. Notable for me because this actually answers a couple of questions I've had, all accompanied by the intimidating message of be afraid, be very afraid. 5 links lay here, and the only one worth talking about is a short prehistory of the CCRU. It is here where we learn the history of the entire site, which I've already explained. However, my explanation of the Cybernetic Cultural Research Unit mainly comes from research done by my and my co-writer's own accord. The actual information provided via the website is so nonsensical and rambling, it's hard to make any coherent timeline out of this. Once again, playing the tradition of purposely being hard to follow and esoteric, notably in this scenario being told out of order. Also, just getting into long-winded diatribes about Y2K, like, honestly, that's what most of this article actually talks about. But we can finally pull back and go to another site now. MNDSMLNLS is a pretty simple site. The crux of the content here is a collection of quotes, presumably from the author. They can range from nonsensical to non-substantial and everything in between. The main through line is that these quotes seem to focus on subjects concerning soul, spirit, mind, and body. The other page on the site is just information about the author. Very statistical information, by the way. They also provided this picture. I just love it so much. But moving on. Cyberdoxicology was, as the link even says, unfortunately purged. However, in its place is a NFT ring called Yayo. Yayo being slang for cocaine, of course. For the first time, an NFT series brings the power of cocaine to the metaverse. But it's just another run-of-the-mill NFT scam. It's interesting for sure, but it's not the focus of this video, so moving right along. SpaceTL is just an official NASA website tracking space-related activities and updating the official space calendar. As expected from an official, globally recognized agency, it's very in-depth with its entries. I don't know why I bring this up as a distinction, considering some of these other sites were, as far as I can tell, completely independent and have been equally as detailed. The last link worth talking about is a bunch of ones, which brings you to a video of a lecture that Timothy Leary gave at the Whole Life Expo in Los Angeles in November 1989. A very important and reoccurring video these circles seem to push around quite often. For the uninformed, the Whole Life Expo is an exposition that I believe is still ongoing, which is meant to promote and connect others with an alternative sense of diet. Think holistic healing and whatnot. Now, the lecture itself is about an hour long, and I've watched the entire thing and not too much to take away here. It's just an old dude talking about technology and LSD, which sounds pretty fucking cool actually. However, somehow, even that is boring. I still recommend the watch if you really want to know what's going on. However, I recommend just skipping the last 20 or 15 minutes of the video, because that's when he starts answering questions from the crowd. That segment is much more engaging than the rest. So, sip.neocities.org, or Olivia site, is an interesting exploration in and of itself. But the sheer number of branching paths provided by the many additional links, and those websites branching off into their own different links, and so on and so forth, makes for a very interesting and seemingly endless rabbit hole. However, I had to cut myself off there. I got my fill, I enjoyed my time, but I'm done. I thank my friend that sent me that original link. I let him know how bad shit it is and so on. They respond, dude, I have a bunch more. I'll send them when I get home. Shit. Now, thankfully, a majority of these links are more so on the lighthearted, fun, and goofy side. I know after everything we discussed thus far, y'all are in need of a break. A little cool down from the barrage of pure mind-numbing babble. So, jollyroll.ml. If this isn't peak web design, I don't know what is. Hi, my name is Jolie. Welcome to my website. And before anyone starts to feel bummed out, Memorial is just a collection of Jolie's past profile pictures for presumably their social media accounts. Strangely enough, Olivia from sip.neocities also had their own little section showcasing their past profile pictures. This is actually a byproduct of a much bigger overarching belief that seems to be somewhat present throughout these sites, and that's cyber Shintoism. So, Shintoism, or Shinto, is a religion that originated in Japan. However, this religion is classified as a East Asian religion, just to clarify. Now, it's hard to summarize an entire religion just for one point of interest, so I'll just give the key notes that pertain to this scenario. Shinto is a polytheistic religion and revolves around kami, supernatural entities believed to inhabit all things. This, in return, promotes harmony and purity in all aspects of life, because, per the belief, everything is connected in some way or the other. It is common practice to worship kami through household shrines, family shrines, and jinja public shrines. Cyber Shintoism is essentially the same thing, but applied to things online. Treating your online accounts, files, images, etc. as living beings, holding them in memorials when they die. It's very reflective of these sorts of beliefs, and other aspects such as temples and prayer and fortune boxes are other aspects of the religion that appear on this site that I'll talk about in just a second. However, what's worth pointing out is that this kind of outlook on the internet is a rather optimistic form of accelerationism. The idea of participating in a fast-moving internet landscape with admiration and respect for things that have fallen in its wake is much different from the more doomer mentality. Yeah? But moving on. Story just recollects the tale about a clock Jolie had, in handwritten form from a notebook, strangely enough. Also, the attached photo of the alleged clock. Temple is where the true magic takes place. Cute or horrific, This is the little man that greets you, surrounded by a barrage of words and sentences, all seemingly random. In the top left, you can pray. Type anything and a text box will state that your prayer has been received. Top right says, key smash, and I'll give you a premonition of the future. Do exactly that, and a text box will say fortune granted. If it isn't already obvious, either the prayer box, fortune box, or even both boxes is what causes these words and sentences to appear. Everything that appears are from other wanderers who stumble upon this very website. But that's it for Jolly Roll. Short and simple, so let's move right along to Kyle's place. You know exactly what vibe is going down at Kyle's place just from a first glance. Kirby jamming out to the tunes playing, Navi replacing your cursor unless you scroll down to the Chow section and then it changes, and I don't know why I'm describing everything when it's a visual medium after all. The quote up front reads, "We proclaim unto us God's gifts, the tasks of fashioning his creation into something new, yet not new. For truly nothing is the material is to be our material, and in it also are the blueprints of heaven revealed. Holy energies divided, passing through from potential. Every territorialized, diverse, and distinct, and endless spectra. They are dark forces which encroach upon from the finite, arriving from outside the source of all these things through is in the beginning one word, one chapter, then it is two, and then again 3. For in the unfolding of this story, though, and by all its goodness, found and forever called good." This is yet another optimistic take on accelerationism or evolution of religion on the internet. However, it's nothing crazy concerning the stuff we just covered, and unfortunately, the About Me section is under construction. But it does lead to a SoundCloud page. Here's a quick taste of the music. This SoundCloud is also linked on the homepage in the bottom left, along with other miscellaneous links, like their Twitter and this one Bossa Nova Neocities site. However, the one thing that's truly cool about this site is that it has its own Flash games, made in Unity. The first one is a pinball game. The main gimmick though is that you control the paddles, as you would in any other pinball game, but you also control this little human figure with WASD controls. To what effect, I don't know. You see, this is more of a proof of concept than anything else. The actual design is plain and there's no real progression or consequence of the game. At the very least, it's a neat idea, and it does have some very lovely pixel art. Some may get excited over a title like Magical Girls, but it is actually just a balloon fight type game with a magical girl. A very hard one at that. This one, however, is much more fleshed out. If I was any good at this game, I would even say it's a complete game, but since I can't get past the 3rd level, I can't be for certain. Once again, beautiful pixel art and beautifully animated. Now the last part to Kyle's place is the garden, only accessible via correctly timed mouse click through the scrolling text at the top of the page. It's just a collection of potted plant GIFs. That's it. Nothing more and nothing less. And hey, if you want to send some transparent plant GIFs, especially if potted, to this email address, then by all means, go ahead. Probably make their day. It'd make my day. But next link. Bo Novokavi, or Novokavi Vault, is a very novel site, yet unfortunately mostly gutted. You see, it's a rather standard blog, interpersonal information-like site. However, the main kick is that Bo actually uses a cartoon persona, and might I say that the art is really superb. Like, look at this travel pic to Pupteria. I just really like the aesthetic. The bad part is, there's barely anything left on this site. All entries leads you to a dead end. Associated site, gutterworld.neocities.org, is no longer around. The only thing left still intact is the initial homepage welcoming you to their site and their About Me section. And I'll just go ahead and read what's on here because it's not much. I'm a researcher under Infree Corsair Team, Bunny Otter Data Libertarian Division. It's a fucking mouthful. Prettiest boy rank. Bad English, be advised. I travel a lot due to work, so maybe I got too much time to kill online in between. Novokavi Vault came to me as a way to keep track of what's happening, organize thoughts, and waste away. And for the record, I couldn't find any information about Infree Corsair. The closest thing I could find on it, that I'm not even sure is remotely related, is an American gaming company called Corsair, who manufacture video game related hardware and peripherals. So, probably nothing to do with what Bo is associated with, but you never know. Moving on. Wife material from the top starts with a quick fire facts. Chloe, Orlando, Florida, blonde, blue eyes, Catholic, pale, underweight. After that, straight to the point with these categories. Writings, videos, images, drawings, Tumblr captions. I mean, do I really have to explain what these are about? After everything I talked about prior, this is pretty straightforward stuff here. There's a collection of writings, all interesting in their own right, but the real crown jewel worth highlighting is the very first one. I will remember this moment. Now, fair warning, I will be reading this story in full, and it deals with very heavy subject matters. Skip to the timestamp on the screen if this isn't for you. He said he first spoke to me because I was my age and I was holding a very big book. These things impressed him, and he was even more impressed that the book was The Fountainhead. He asked me if I understood what I was reading. I told him I didn't understand his question, and he laughed, but I didn't feel in on the joke. He drove me around in his very nice red car. My parents didn't drive like him, and I thought I liked it, even though it frightened me. He would play Videotape by Radiohead. He would play Angels by the XX. He would play Lolita by Lana Del Rey. He came inside my house without my parents' permission, and I was a good kid who was too afraid to ask. I showed him my room, my video games, my toys, my books. He squatted and scanned over my bookshelf until he grunted in a noise I took as satisfaction. He asked me how old I was when I had read these. I told him I was 11, 12, 13. He smirked at me and reminded me I didn't understand what I was reading, and I felt my skin get hot. I showed him Metropolis, and I hoped he was impressed. I tried watching the movie, but I kept thinking, I hope this impresses him. A 14-year-old knows Metropolis. He likes sci-fi. He is wise beyond his years, and this makes me want to have sex with him. The kind of sex my Omegle friends could have never given me, because I was 12, and he was 26, and he was 24, and he was 22. And they would have driven to me, but had a major moral epiphany somewhere near Gainesville and turned back home. After school, I ride my bike to his house. It was far, but not far enough, and I would feel something I didn't understand every time a truck passed me going 45. I did this until my brother crashed my bike into a tree during a seizure, which I chose to blame his carelessness for. We didn't see each other for a while. He was too busy to drive me, and I understood that. He had responsibilities I couldn't begin to fathom. One day after school, he found the time to pick me up. I told my friends about him, about his car, how they should watch from a distance. On his bed, he pulled his laptop up and put on a movie I hadn't seen. I felt nervous in his room, so I tried to focus on the film. I tried to count the stripes on Michael Cera's shirt. I tried to estimate the total calories Ellen Page drank in orange juice. I was trying to read a billboard in the background when he shifted my body, pulling my face up to his. "I'm gonna fuck you," he said to me. "Okay," I told him. I was scared. He asked if I meant that in a good way, and I was confused. He laughed and told me not to be. He gave me 2 pills. He gave me 151 to wash them down. I asked him what the 151 stood for, and he laughed at me again before kissing me. He pushed my head down. I put him in my mouth. As some sort of joke to myself, and to appease him, I begin to fake cry. I whimper and choke and feel something change. He tells me not to pretend to cry. If he wants me to cry, I will. And I put my head back down. My face hot, my body shaking. We move. Our bodies shift, and we move again. It hurts, and I close my eyes and think about the movie Juno. I forget everything when he puts his hands on my wrist and tells me not to fight back. I push lightly. He looks disappointed in me. This makes me sick to my stomach. He picks me up and puts me on a desk chair. I come all over myself. My entire torso is covered. This was not supposed to happen. He hates me now. He thinks something is wrong with me. I look at his face, and he is non-verbally telling me this is wrong and I should be ashamed. I blush. I am red and white, and I need to leave. That's so hot. So, Sean Cody, he says. I don't know what that is, so I giggle and feel no longer afraid. He got a towel, he wiped me off. I felt loved and cared for and dizzy. He told me he couldn't drive me home. He had somewhere to be after this. I asked him where, and he smiled and shook his head. I told him I could walk home. I didn't want to be a bothersome. He touched my cheek, and then my chin, and said, "And that's what I like so much about you." It was quiet until I left. It was hot out. I started to run. I thought to myself, the wind feels so strong. I thought to myself, the trucks pass right there. I thought to myself, some summers last forever. I miss your house parties. I love you, but I guess I'm a shitty person. And I felt like I should cry, but I wasn't. So I started to whimper, imagining that noise alone would force the rest of my face to submit to this new state. But your words echoed. Don't pretend to cry. So I stopped, but I kept running. I know for some that might have been hard to stomach, but the reason why I chose to read this story in full is because it underlines an aspect we often forget in regards to eccentric personalities we find on the internet. It's so easy to mock and laugh at these people that at a certain point we just view them as characters. Their sense of humanity is stripped away, and what we are left with is a figure for their beliefs. This story, as gut-wrenching as it is, does a great job of really humanizing Chloe. No longer a character, but as a human. It puts in perspective that these people become who they are through a series of events most won't divulge, except for this website. Now, there are two image galleries, one called Family Photos, and the other called Everyone I Loved in 2005, that are too personal for me to share. It's nothing bad, it's just standard family photos and whatnot, but I don't feel comfortable sharing them on here. It's nothing interesting either. Tumblr captures are nothing special either. Here they are, pause and look over them if you want. But the true piece de resistance is the drawings. First is Farm, which I'll read it like a children's book to you. I want to live in a house made of wood, with chickens and cows made of meat, a garden of vegetables, and a husband made of steel. The next story, I Live Here, is even more simpler than that. I live here, I work here, I read here, I rest here. Now, the last drawing is special. It's not a story this time, just a simple drawing called He Wanted to Show You Something. And here's that drawing. It's perfect. And while these sites were all good and fun and a good break from all the religious, spiritual, and science-related jargon, it is now time to go back in. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the true heaven on the internet. This is exoscience. The World Wide Web came to us first as history's greatest library of information, freely accessible by the everyman, then as a global network of real-time communication between radically ennobled users. Now we see it diverted into an information-negative mass propaganda complex, using the same tools of ascension towards subjugation. Much work is being done to castrate its potential as the machinations of the surface world descend deeper and deeper into a contemporary dark age. But communities of correspondents self-organize in shadow networks, scientists, archivists, experimenters, and investors, sharing the discoveries and rediscoveries of their unsponsored research now catalyzed by the Universal Information Library. The knowledge suppression of the long 20th century has been cracked open, and its contemporary suppression attempts will never succeed against this new tide. Our world, led by the credentialed experts and stolid institutions, has found itself poisoned, misinformed, maleducated, chartering a long path of self-destruction. We, the exoscientists, the autodidacts, the para-academics, the independent thinkers, tinkerers, researchers, we now hold all the tools needed to shine a light onto their darkness. After a quick blurb talking about what it means to be an exoscientist, you ascend the staircase and are welcome to what I can only describe as heaven on the internet. It is here where we will find various different subject matters. Some for sure will pique your interest at just a glance. Black holes are not real, they can't hurt you, and raw eggs equals shampoo are just some of the ones that got me. However, before diving into any of that, if we scroll down to the bottom of the page, we will find a collection of banner ads leading to other recommended sites. Unfortunately, many of them are no longer up, or require some kind of username and password to enter. But curiously enough, 3D Testosterone is one of these sites listed. Once again, leading me to believe that this site held some kind of bigger significance at some point or another concerning its heavy recommendation and affiliation within this internet scene. The only site left functioning is Scorched Earth Policy, which could be explained by its very own logline that reads, "Welcome to a grassroots nuclear holocaust, powered exclusively by a storyteller from an alternative reality that sometimes leaks into our own." The site itself actually doesn't feature much. Instead, it implores viewers to head over to their Twitter and or YouTube accounts to follow the story. However, the YouTube channel just has this one video on it, and the Twitter account is interesting. The whole idea is actually a perfect example of posadism, which is a well-known belief of J. Posadas. Basically, this ideology states that nuclear war is inevitable, and instead of waiting around for the forces of capitalism to bring this reality through to fruition, nuclear-armed socialist states should launch a preemptive attack. This, in return, would destroy the nuclear capabilities of a capitalist country, and spark some sort of revolution. An ideology popularized amongst the height of the Cold War demonstrates a nuclear approach to accelerationism with a splash of Marxism. The idea that a catastrophic event of mass proportions is the key to radically overhaul society for the better is questionable, to say the least. However, that's all there is for the side content, and now we can dive into the main event. I see no better way to go through this content than to do one category at a time, so let's begin with sounds that can heal. Sounds that can heal starts off simple and straightforward enough, with quick talking points on how certain sounds can affect our emotions. The sound of broken glass can be jarring, the sounds of a toddler's footsteps can melt our hearts, and so on and so forth. His words, not mine. It quickly makes it a point to define infrasounds, which is the frequency in which human ears can hear, the margin being from 20 Hz all the way up to 20,000 Hz. Then, when you're all on board, they interject a quote from the World Health Organization stating that there is no reliable evidence suggesting that sounds below the infrasound range affects human psychology. This is immediately followed up with, "If you're like me, you naturally assume that the truth is the absolute opposite of what the WHO says," and indeed that rule seems to be accurate here. Before then showing a brain scan which depicts brain activation from 12 Hz, which, if we remember, is below the infrasound threshold. It's also pointed out that some of these activation sites are linked to the auditory processing, but other parts affect the emotional control and the autonomic nervous system. This is actually a good thing according to the author, as these sounds may have many benefits. They do make it a note in saying that there are some consequences, with a specific fixation on the wind power plants. But they brush by these negatives so fast, and the larger narrative here is that these sounds, at the very least, can benefit you if implemented properly. Also, there is this segment where they say music of any genre lowers testosterone in males and raises them in females. They speculate it may be a way to regulate social tensions, but at the same time, it's very level-headed and self-aware. The author flat out states that this isn't the point of the article. It's not meant to scare you away from music, it's just merely another piece of the puzzle. Another miscellaneous part of the puzzle is the whole 440 Hz versus 432 Hz conspiracy theory that states roughly 100 years ago music went from 432 Hz as the standard to 440 Hz, which is the new standard. It is stated that these additional 8 Hz not only worsens the music, because through a double-blind study it is found that 432 Hz proved to lower the heart rate, respiration rate, and even stress level. But that's all about music. What about silence? Well, you're in luck, because there's a whole segment talking about just that. Silence is golden, right? Wrong. Silence induces anxiety due to our primordial days when the only time true silence would be achieved was when a predator was looming nearby. All according to this article, of course. And while all this is interesting and very questionable, what about sounds that can heal? You know, the point of all this? Well, let's finally get into that. Here's a list of frequencies said to heal in various different ways. These frequencies were compiled from audio researchers and Bible passages. No clue where from the Bible, this point isn't expanded on or even cited in the research at the bottom, so your guess is as good as mine. Anyways, my personal favorites are 285 Hz being able to heal wounds, and 741 Hz just in case y'all want a detox. But remember, only one of these frequencies has been studied scientifically, and the results are quite incredible. The other frequency worth highlighting is 528 Hz, which is said to increase love, clarity of mind, and deep inner peace. Only worth highlighting because this article has its own section to go along with it, known as the frequency of love due to the listener's rise in oxytocin. Oxytocin being the chemical most associated with the concept of love. This point is further elaborated on through studies and charts. There's even a point that states this frequency protects against alcohol, and at the very end, we got a Spotify playlist plug. This specific frequency is also notable because it's the frequency of the sound that plays on the Exoscience main page. But I digress. There's a very brief passage talking about 320 Hz and how that frequency makes you alert and active, because they tested this on snails. The rest of the page just talks about nature sounds, and how no ugly frequencies can exist out in nature. And then it's just a bunch of slagging off scientists. Once again, Exoscience disregards the WHO, so of course actual scientists are written off as well. However, what's really interesting, and what my co-writer has pointed out, is that despite the dismissal of these scientific studies, Exo will still adopt the scientific formula as a way to rely his, knowledge, per se. A point I'll demonstrate in a bit, but for now, that's enough about sound. Let's move on to the next one. The Parascientific Compendium is a chart I'm sure many are familiar with at this point. However, it doesn't really function like a traditional iceberg we've all come to know. Instead, it functions like, well, a compendium. It really does just showcase ideas that will be explored throughout the Exoscience site. Some may even be already recognizable, like the Spotify 528 Hz sleeping playlist. But almost all of these entries are something we will all eventually get into and discuss. However, what's really interesting is that there are in fact entries on this list that Exo himself does not necessarily agree with. But outside of that, not much else to say. So let's keep it moving. The act of grounding can be easily summed up by one of the first passages. The surface of our dear Earth Mother is electrically charged. When we stand barefoot on her, we are like phones with chargers plugged in. She provides us with an unlimited constant supply of electrons. So yeah, quite basically, if you ever feel tired or drained, walking around in the forest barefoot will perk you right up. I don't think it's a ridiculous claim. Us humans are animals after all. And a nice walk in nature has proven to relieve stress. It clears your mind. But the idea of grounding yourself to the earth with bare feet so electrons can flow through you is not really supported by any scientific research. Of course, it's not supported because all big research companies are paid off, and you have to get your sources from independently funded researchers. Of course, this is just the rhetoric perpetuated by all these sites thus far. While the sentiment of not trusting the World Health Organization is nothing new, it is the most prevalent throughout Exoscience in specific, which is oftentimes ironic given how the nature of these posts are structured, as in each idea is presented through the scientific method, stating a hypothesis, testing said hypothesis through various different methods, deriving data, having a discussion, doing a peer review or lack thereof, and so on and so on. Despite being very anti-big science, they still implement and use the scientific method in almost every one of their own findings. Which does beg the question of, why? And to be honest, I don't really know why personally. On one hand, the framing device of the scientific method could just be used as a frame of reference for newcomers to grasp the basics of their research. Or at the very least, they recognize the scientific method as a valid process and just have a lot of anti-authority and anti-government feelings with the knowledge of Big Pharma's greed, possibly, in their eyes, warping their research. It's very up in the air, honestly, and I would love to hear some of your own interpretations. Anyways, this article goes on to demonize shoes and asphalt, harking everything back to before modern civilization, equating that the old ways of life were much more beneficial for our health. Once again, contradicting their whole accelerationism stance and their whole new age of the internet rhetoric with such a stark juxtaposition. This narrative is further elaborated on through a series of charts relating the act of grounding to sleep patterns, white blood cell counts, pain threshold, and even showing before and after pictures of people. There's even a list of benefits that kinda looks similar to the sounds that can heal benefits. Just combine the two and you're gonna be feeling like a new man. However, the article is self-aware and recognizes that through our own modern ways of living and our urban jungles, grounding is becoming an increasingly harder feat to achieve. So, there's products you can buy to counteract that. Like this earthing sheet for your bed, or this grounding strap for handling electronics, or this grounding mat for your computer, or this grounding patch if you got, I don't know, withdrawals. And finally, these grounding shoes. What makes these products grounding products is a bunch of bullshit. They're all said to draw energy from the Earth's electrons and ward off the ones emitted from modern technology like phones, TVs, and computers. This is just a point that's not really explained at all. Now you may be saying, but Colin, what about my bath? Well, good news! Your bath is already grounded since metal and water are already great conductors and your pipes act like cables connecting you to the earth. You see, it's dumb logic, but at least it's consistent dumb logic, I guess. While we're on the subject of baths, this will make a great transition point to our next topic. At this point, it's apparent that there is a somewhat sound pattern involved, as these articles always start off with very sensible and understandable notes. In this case, they point out that there's a lot of chemicals in shampoo that actually harm your hair, and that's a solid point to start with. It's been a problem as of recent, and many companies are reworking their formulas. But then the article slowly gets a bit more outlandish. Basically, what I'm saying is that I can understand how people develop this mindset that some may call insane. It's a very persuasive writing style, only really debunked by the fact that these sources, if provided, aren't the most reliable. That being said, I think the title says it all. Raw eggs equals shampoo. They have this diagram showcasing all the benefits, charts showing that it actually works, and even a personal testimonial from the author that reads, "I've enjoyed a huge improvement in hair and skin quality. But the biggest win is the feeling of stepping out of the shower having only been nourished instead of being assaulted by harsh chemicals. I was very surprised by how good this feels." And if eggs aren't really your speed, don't worry. There's also a provided list of alternatives: apple cider vinegar, milk, kefir, baking soda, and mayonnaise. Which, not to be pedantic, but the biggest component in mayonnaise is egg, so come on. Nothing left to say here though, so next. This one hooks you from the start with, "I was born with a resting bitch face." No, you're a bitch. Not only is that just funny, but it also demonstrates the core ideology behind the whole read. Basically, your physical features are the outward expression of who you really are, i.e., if you look like a bitch, you're a bitch. They take the old wives' tale of, if you keep making that face, it'll get stuck like that, and run with it. And that's not an exaggeration, they literally say that. However, much like everything else, they break it down piece by piece and interject their own pseudoscience studies in order to make some sense. Even then, it's still a bit general and a bit vague. Like, if you want better lips, you should talk more, be honest, and don't censor yourself. Easy steps to follow, but what exactly are better lips? I'm assuming fuller lips, but looks are subjective from person to person. Also, they don't exactly break down how these actions could achieve these effects. However, the steps behind having a thin face are properly broken down for us, so we can at least get a little insight. The requirements of smile, chew, and shout are pretty simple, but this is what is said on how these activities help. Stand in front of a mirror. Smile wide. You can literally feel how muscles are pulling on your face. Make it wider. It takes time to build neural connections with the facial muscles and feeling the skeletal structure underneath, but you'll get there faster than you think. As pseudoscience rhetoric goes, there are at least some facts based on reality here, but by and large, the overall claim isn't really supported by anything substantial. It gets a little goofy when a picture of an old man is described as an intelligent, thinking man, because the wrinkles indicate prolonged exposure to tightening orifices, which then goes on to indicate increased focus. Like, the dude's just old. Also, this passage about actor Sean Penn is just hilarious. You think Sean Penn just naturally looks like this? That'd be as ridiculous as assuming bodybuilders are born with enormous muscles. I can bet that this man has spent thousands of hours in front of a mirror. I salute him for his excellent work, just like Arnold with his physique. Just totally not going to bring up the fact that Sean Penn is a millionaire, and it's not all too uncommon for people with lots of money to routinely get touch-ups to their own face, especially if they're celebrities. The rest of these writings are nothing substantial. The last biggest point of content that is touched on is tongue placement, or rather the act of mewing. Some may already be familiar with such a concept. It seems this exercise has spread across the internet many different times throughout the years. It is essentially a tongue and jaw exercise meant to reshape your face to have a stronger, more pronounced jawline. There's many provided before and after images, even a whole Reddit community dedicated to this phenomenon. But to no surprise, once again, there is no actual substantial medically backed evidence and or research that suggests this exercise works to the effects demonstrated. I'm sure it might work to a fault, just not to the degree as it is advertised. Also, one last note, there's a line near the end that reads, "Mouth breathing lowers IQ," which is hilarious, but it's also a cited sentence. The citation used brings you to a PDF titled, "In the Name of God." And I'm no scientist, but the study doesn't seem like it checks out. Which I know I've been saying that a lot throughout this video, but let's take some time to properly explain why these sources don't check out. The first two references cited at the bottom of the page come from Reddit posts, so already not very credible. The references specifically pertain to mewing. The third reference actually directs us to the same site in which the Andrel from Forgotten Languages interview took place, which took me by surprise, which then in return actually got me to find out what the site is all about. This site is called Medium. It's a 100% legit and normal site. However, it's not a journalistic site like I once thought it was. It's a blog posting kind of site. And the story referenced by Exoscience literally starts with disclaimer, this is my story. I am not a doctor. This is not intended to be any type of medical advice. So yeah, another great cited source here. The fourth reference is yet again another Reddit mewing post, so count it. Oh, and along with the fifth link. I'm sure you get it at this point. Each cited source is just not backed by any medical or science foundation. But then again, big science is corrupted, so why would they? Anyways, moving on. The story of Cleve Baxter is no short of the word insane. I feel like that could be said about a lot of things I've talked about thus far, but in order to properly showcase this story, I'll actually just read a good chunk of it and summarize the rest. In the 1940s, Cleve Baxter served in the Counterintelligence Corps, where he once hypnotized his secretary to leak documents to him, just to prove a point. In 1948, he joined the CIA, where he was a pioneer in polygraph technology, where he was involved in interrogations with sodium pentanol, truth serum, and God knows what else. He devised what became the worldwide standard for lie detection, Baxter Zone Comparison Test. He left the CIA to start his own polygraph business, which went well until everything changed on February 2nd, 1966. His secretary bought a plant. A Dracana. It was the first plant he ever owned. He connected a polygraph to it, and to his surprise, it was jittery and alive, changing over time. After a minute, it showed a significant short spike. If a man had this reaction, he'd be distressed. He tried dipping a leaf in hot coffee, but nothing happened. He poked it, still nothing. After 14 minutes, Cleve had a spontaneous thought. He visualized getting some matches, burning the leaf attached to the lie detector. The plant had an enormous reaction. His thought alone was enough to make a measurable difference. I will summarize some of the findings. Plants are always aware of what's happening around them. This is not rooted in electromagnetism. Faraday cages won't stop this phenomenon. It is non-local. So you can be on the other side of the world and still affect another life form with your thoughts. Plants will tune into everything that's alive around them, even bacteria. Humans instantly command the attention of uneaten plants whenever we come close. They don't care about the bacteria when humans are nearby. So, pretty crazy, huh? The rest of the article just goes on to elaborate on his findings, talking about the recreations of these tests that were done in the future, along with plugging a $300 machine you can buy to recreate said experiment on your own accord. But the big point made at the end is how everything on the Earth is interconnected and that we all share one consciousness. Once again, the initial premise that is, plants have feelings, is not all too out there. Plants are technically living beings, so the thought isn't too hard to get on board with. it hooks you in. But the association between the polygraph on the planet itself makes for a leap in logic. An even further leap is the final statement of everything being interconnected. The idea of affecting a person on the other side of the world with our own thoughts and energy just doesn't make any sense given the prior information. Not saying that the concept would make sense with proper context, but what I'm saying is that there's usually some sort of buildup or evidence for such a claim. This just leaps from plants to life in coexistence as we know it, with nothing in between. And no, the rest of the readings here don't go into it any more than that. Anyways, next one. The Aspden effect is a study done in 1994 by Dr. Harold Aspden, in which he conducted an experiment in which he ran an electrical motor for a couple minutes until it reached its full speed of 3,250 RPM. The total energy required to achieve these results was 300 joules. However, after shutting off the machine for 5 minutes and redoing the test, this time the motor only took half the time to reach the full speed, and at only 30 joules being expended. To some, this may seem like a bunch of science talk, and it is, but basically this completely goes against the laws of inertia. This article goes on to say that no one has even tried to replicate the experiment ever again, at least any mainstream academics, and that's it. The author implores people to share their own findings, just showing how little evidence there is in such an experiment. At least this time around, it's not spun into some larger narrative. So, moving on. So, fluoride, bromine, and iodine all exist within the halogen family of the periodic table. Despite other elements existing in this group, the author says he will not be talking about them, and then proceeds to talk about chlorine for just a quick second. But the rest really is focused on fluoride, bromine, and iodine. Well, and also selenium, but we'll get to that in a second. So, fluoride is a frequent talking point amongst these conspiracy theories pseudoscience crowds. And you've probably heard a little bit of their talking points by now. Quite frankly, the information provided doesn't add anything new. They just go over how fluoride's in everything and how it lowers people's IQ, specifically in children. Bromine is more or less the same story here, except instead of lowering your IQ, bromine is said to increase mental health problems. Like everything, there are charts and shaky sources to help prove these accusations. I may be brushing by these two elements, but truth be told, these two are only quick talking points. And the bulk of this entire article really does seem to be fixated on iodine. Instead of vilifying iodine, it does the opposite. We need iodine, but companies and shadowy figures are suppressing our iodine intake, resorting to people becoming iodine deficient. This iodine deficiency, mixed with the uptick in fluoride and bromine intake, leads to a myriad of health problems, with a specific focus on enlarged thyroids and fibrocystic breast changes. And I quote, "WHO has designated iodine deficiency as the most preventable cause of mental retardation in the world." However, the other miracle iodine provides is the fact that it can actually remove fluoride and bromine from your body. Although, as the author states, there are years worth of fluoride and bromine in your body, so it's best to microdose iodine to not overdo it all at once. Now, what's the best source of iodine? Well, it's kelp, but only in small doses. But you're still not in the clear. Your body needs a cofactor to play off the iodine, the cofactor being selenium, which is found most commonly in a Brazilian nut. So just eat those nuts and kelp and you're good to go. Just like how we're good to go onto the next topic. Despite the name, the writings don't actually explain what is exactly up with water outside of a short passage at the very start that reads, "I shouldn't even explain need to why. You already know tap water is full of toxins." But to stretch the point, you're getting all sorts of filth like xenoestrogens, fluoride, chlorine, pesticides, birth control, and other prescription drugs. So apparently it's rather common knowledge. Instead, the focus of this article is ways to improve your water in all aspects, from the sink to the shower and everything in between. For the sink, a basic fluoride faucet filter will do the trick, while the shower needs both a water filter and a shower head filled with many different minerals. The last step to improve your water is a lot more conceptual than practical. Okay, so according to these writings, water is alive, and like all living things, it has memories and can die. Basically, if you add a toxin to water, say fluoride, even if you filter it out, it will still exist within the water because the water itself will remember it. But also, water moves in a spiral motion. Any still water is considered dead and not living to their full potential. The author suggests spiraling your water before consumption for maximum benefits, and even taking it one step further, he suggests buying and installing spiraling pipes for $398. However, you can't just drink this water out of the normal glass or water bottle. No. You have to specifically drink out of a flaska, which is best described by the author itself. Flaska is a Slavic company that programs the glass bottles to structure water. Wait, what? Program bottles? Can you store information in glass? Yes. Crystalline structures can be used to save data in a process called holographic data storage, and glass is very much like water in the sense that it's not a crystal, but it contains microcrystalline structures throughout, which can be programmed into different states. The mechanism that stores the imprint inside the glass is not yet known or understood, but we know in principle about holographic storage. We know at least one plausible mechanism. Flaska imprints these bottles using the Quest biofeedback device and the Mandalay organ cannon, both from the company Educator. They describe the process on their website with a little more detail. That description is followed up with a couple charts which, feel free to decipher them if you want. But if you think you're ready to drink that water now, just wait, because you also need a tensor ring, which is a twisted copper wire with a specific length in a connected circle. Basically, these things take energy from Earth's magnetic field and fortify your water. Recommended to be placed on your shower head, sinks, and even your water bottles. The author even noting that copper is quite expensive, so your budget is the limit. The more rings, the better. Also, a quick side note. These rings don't just enhance water, they enhance anything. Wear it around your wrist and smoke a cigarette, and you'll find smoke to be more agreeable with you. However, if you don't have a tensor ring, you can use paramagnetic sand, which is made up of magnetite, quartz, mica, and garnet. And I just gotta share this passage. Whenever I grab my bottle, a tiny amount of paramagnetic sand is stuck to the bottom of it due to its condensation, and I rub it across my chest because it feels fucking amazing. I call this a magnetic shower. There's other factors at play, such as being nice and praying to your water, playing the classic 528 Hz frequency for your water, and apparently Himalayan salt lamps create micro movements within liquid, making it more beneficial or whatever. There's other miscellaneous steps at play, such as not putting your drinking glass into dishwashers because they erase the energy that glass has captured. There's also other steps like adding Omni Blue Ocean minerals to remineralize your water. Also, never finish an entire cup of water. Always leave a little bit behind so that... Fuck, dude, it's just water. What's with all the fucking steps? That's enough. You get the picture, right? Moving on. Orgone energy is basically life energy. It's only called orgone energy because, and get this, because it originated from orgasm studies and the fact that the energy can change organic matter. But I'm sticking with the orgasm thing. But the rest of the article is a bunch of charts and studies and research findings that are just so hard to understand, let alone follow. I mean, dude, look. You're seeing all this shit, right? Even with context, I'm telling you, none of it makes sense. And look how much information there is here. It just keeps going and going and going. I've spent several hours reading, trying to understand and rereading this very own topic over and over again, trying to write this segment of the video. But you know what? It's just not that interesting. If I fully went into depth, I'll lose the remaining 3 people still watching this video. So if you want to understand, be my guest. But we are pretty much skipping this one because I don't understand it fully and it's just not that interesting. So, moving on. Pretty straightforward with this one. Basically, different markings will appear in your eyes correlating to different health problems. Here's a chart if you really want to know what means what. However, and it should really go without saying at this point, none of this is backed by any credible research whatsoever. Except this time around, a large majority of these articles is focused on just straight up bashing doctors and medical research institutions, with such passages reading as, when you Google iridology and related terms, the first page is dominated by Wikipedia, Quackwatch, Science-Based Medicine, WebMD, and so on. All of these have one thing in common. They say that every alternative therapy is unproven, unfounded, and potentially harmful. This is a natural in this day and age, where people's health are counted in dollars and cents. And so on and so forth. Of course, the main benefit here, as they claim, is the ability to do your very own medical checkup without resorting to going to a doctor. But really, that's all there is to this one. So, moving on. EMF, for the unaware, stands for electric magnetic fields, and while it was previously described as a good energy worth harvesting, this time around the distinction is made that there is in fact bad energy emitted from the likes of Wi-Fi routers, computers, cell phones, and the classic cell phone towers. Your body will naturally absorb both positive and negative energy, and it is possible for your body to transform negative to positive yourself. You've done this yourself many times. On a micro level, it seems like every cell has energetic metabolism where this occurs. Positive energy in, negative energy out. Your body expels the negative energy through breath, sweat, thoughts, and social interactions. However, that being said, the best way to expel this negative energy is with orgonite. What is orgonite? Well, it's a 50-50 mix of resin and metal shavings with a quartz crystal placed in the middle. And telling by this simple chart, you can see it's pretty effective. But don't forget, orgonite is a huge help in improving the energetic environment. If you place them right, you can affect huge areas. For a laughably low price, you can transform entire neighborhoods, cities, forests, and lakes. The studies done to prove the effect of orgonite were all done on plants, produce, and vegetables. The studies, supposedly, made for a bigger crop yield and food preservation. Lots of photos as usual, but this time around, there is a lot of videos showcasing how well orgonite actually preserves their fruit. And by all means, the video evidence is somewhat convincing. However, there is so many variables involved when it comes to these types of studies. Even then, the grape showcase, they both look exactly the same. But orgonite doesn't just affect food, it can also affect the sky. As you can see, this cloudy forecast slowly clears up thanks to orgonite. I mean, come on, dude. Even the author seems somewhat self-aware of this claim, but ultimately accepts it though. The slideshow above illustrates the most typical impact orgonite will have on the sky, from permanent gray overcast to puffy clouds on the deep blue sky. I realize this sounds completely ridiculous, but I have personally seen this many times. At a certain point, you simply accept it. Clouds are very subjective, and it's easy to see what you want to see, but the color of the sky is hard to explain. How come the sky is twice as blue above my house and Cloudbusters compared to a couple of kilometers away? I have countless stories, and it is proven to me beyond any reasonable doubt that this phenomenon is real. Orgonite can also create ice spikes when freezing water. The benefit this serves isn't really explained, it's just a documented phenomenon, I guess. It does, however, connect back to the whole spiral water bit from earlier. As for the effects on humans, it's the normal beneficial points previously discussed. It de-stresses you, energizes you, and so on and so forth. However, its effects on animals is very different. It is said to attract or repel animals. Which animals are attracted and what are repelled? Well, all the good animals, like cats and dogs, etc., are attracted, while all the bad animals, like any vermin or pests, or even insects, are repelled. The line between the two are seemingly arbitrary. The reason for attraction and repulsion aren't really defined. The only evidence is this one video of ants clearing away from the orgonite, but all that's left is some passage about how to use orgonite, which just boils down to put it everywhere, especially on your phone's pop socket, and also how to make it, which really isn't that complicated of a process, surprisingly. Also, as a bonus, at the very end they not only claim that orgonite can recharge your batteries, but also prolong your battery life. So, yeah. Seems like orgonite is the end-all be-all miracle stone that has little to no real evidence. Moving on. It's exactly what it sounds like. It's a bunch of links. And while we already went over links such as 3D testosterone, there is a bunch more to unpack here. Now, for the sake of pacing, I can't really go into every single link. I mean, some of these deserve videos in their own right. Look at Rex Research. This shit just keeps going. Huge trove of information they don't want you to know. I mean, the dude's not lying. The government has been keeping fog collectors under wraps for too long. It's funny because whale.to is also classified as a site with information they don't want you to see. Well, not as long as Rex, there is still a lot here. Plus it is an easier read overall, mainly because every article is just some insane conspiracy theories with self-made memes fresh out of '08. The other links just seem to be more or less what Exoscience has already covered in their own webpage. To go over those specifics would be kind of redundant. However, I must highlight aajonas.online, which described as the best diet-related website in the world. Anyone knows anything about alternative food people, you would know they're all about consuming raw meat, raw fish, and copious amounts of raw butter. This site's got that in spades. The topics board alone has some great hits, such as safe cutting boards and is raw milk always beneficial even with much bacteria? And my absolute favorite, does rabies exist? Which sounds like a funny title that would entail some bullshit conspiracy theory where the answer is ultimately no. And well, the final answer is no. The conclusion being that the author has not seen enough first-hand accounts of rabies to believe it. However, the start of the story is incredibly fucked up. The author talks about adopting a cat during his, raw vegetarian diet, and therefore forced the cat to partake in the diet as well. Except, the cat didn't eat any of the food it was provided. The cat presumably didn't eat for the next 2 months and then died. The author then proceeds to perform an autopsy on his own cat in his own bathroom. Now, what the fuck does this have to do with rabies? Well, when the cat initially passed away, the author said it was foaming from the mouth. But his own self-done autopsy shows that it wasn't because of rabies. It was because the cat's stomach was actually just eating itself due to starvation. So basically, the guy's whole point here is that my cat was foaming from the mouth when it died. But don't worry, it wasn't rabies. It was simply because I didn't feed my fucking cat and its stomach started eating itself. I know, because I performed an autopsy in my goddamn bathroom. Like, what the fuck? But I think that's enough of highly recommended links, so let's move on to the next one. While not necessarily the leading cause of death, this article does point out that a large number of people do in fact die from doctors, whether it's unneeded surgeries or unneeded prescriptions. This is definitely a problem, but I feel like the concerns and evidence are not only non-substantial, but somewhat blown out of proportion, to the point where the whole piece can read as fear-mongering. But nothing really else to add or go over with this one, so next. Before explaining the phantom leaf effect, I have to explain Colin photography, which is the process of placing an object on a photographic plate, and then connecting that object to a high voltage source, and then by the process of connecting that object to a high voltage source, an image will be produced. Here's what it looks like, and it's pretty cool actually. It essentially gives any given object an electric staticky outline. The phantom leaf effect is a phenomenon in which you take a leaf, cut a part of it off, and take a Colin photograph of it. Despite a piece of the leaf being cut off, it will still appear on the photograph as if it wasn't. It's pretty cool, but also very controversial, and once again, not really supported by science. There have been many attempts to recreate this phantom leaf effect, but to no prevail. And the ones that do end up reproducing such results are highly questionable. Many speculate that these successful attempts are just a simple double exposure photography trick. This article, of course, tries to prove the legitimacy of the effect. They try to turn this into a point about phantom limbs, but they don't really make a point about anything really. And then the whole article just kind of ends with cool Colin photographs. No, really. There's nothing else said, just a collection of cool Colin photographs, and it's kind of nice. But moving on. Your mind can increase the numbers. Try to click the button while you exhale through your nose, and focus on how high your numbers will be. To the right, you can see the cumulative stats and probability of receiving the results. This page uses positive language because we believe in you. You're going to get some really high numbers. Yeah, no, it doesn't work. And that's all there is. Next. It's exactly what it sounds like. A 1,000-page peer review talking about the dangers of vaccines with no shred of solid evidence anywhere in sight. Granted, I didn't read anywhere close to all 1,000 pages, but I don't think that was necessary to make such a conclusion given the other means of evidence provided not just throughout this site, but from these sorts of crowds in the first place. Moving on. Just completely slagging off the existence of black holes, saying what we're really seeing is an uneven ring of plasma. The rest of this long article goes into what exactly black holes are and how our understanding of black holes are all wrong. It's all a bit much, and honestly, at this point, I've been pretty checked out, so I couldn't be bothered to get into all of that. But feel free to be my guest. But with all that being said, that completes our time with Exoscience. We've explored all we could with this site, and we have to say our goodbye. Exoscience leaves us with a message in our departure. I hope you enjoy this site. My biggest wish is that you learn something you will take to heart. And my second biggest wish is that you share this to your friends, family, and anyone you might think be interested. I think there's a part of me that is still captivated by the notion of the internet. While we all use it in our day-to-day lives, to me, there's still this air of mystique to it. Sites left abandoned, chat boards covered in webs and dust as conversations are left unfinished, and even as we just explored, the small active communities left to discuss amongst themselves out of the public site feel strange. There's a weird feeling going through these sites. It's funny as hell at times given all the crazy shit that's being said, but it's also a little bit lonely. These people are talking, but few are listening. And perhaps that's how they want it to be. Only the people seeking the truth can view their knowledge. Only followers can enter the gates of heaven. But for the majority of these sites, the author's voice shines through. You develop a good read on everyone's character, whether it's Olivia, Chloe, or Exoscience. What initially starts out as an interesting, funny read slowly turns into something a bit more tragic. I don't want to say these people are misunderstood and I want to share their stories, because I don't. But I have spent a lot of time on these sites, not just for this video, but in general. I love weird, esoteric, NeoCity-esque sites. The whole reason why my friend sent me those links in the first place is because they knew this about me. But that begs the question, why did I make this video? Well, why did I make any of these videos? Because it's fun. This is a hobby for me, and I like talking about stuff I like. But if I dig a bit deeper, I wanted to get this out there. Nobody has really talked about these sites. Most people like to talk about the more infamous NeoCity sites that are generally more appealing to a mainstream audience. Numerograms scare the hoes, and might come across as boring to some. But that's exactly why I needed to make this video, to talk about this stuff, to put this stuff out there in a more public side of the internet. Even if this barely gets any views, it doesn't matter, because at least, to some extent, it has been seen. I guess I'm more like these people than I thought. By making this video, I'm participating in hyperstition. I am deciphering and pulling from the initial incomprehensible esoteric rhetoric, taking what I've seen and putting it out there on the internet where others will perceive it, which will then go on into the cultural feedback loop and further the cultural production. This video lies permanently in the numerogram, or the decimal labyrinth, and you are all a part of it now too. Thanks for watching.